There are big questions over a reported peace deal with Iran. President Trump announced it before he left overnight for this week's G7 summit that's in France, but the details still remain very unclear. The U.S. and Iran say there is an agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which would help relieve high gas prices. Everybody wants that. But there are conflicting reports on the timing of all of this, along with other key issues. Nancy Cordes is in Geneva ahead of the G7. Nancy, good morning. What do we know? What can you share?
Gayle, what I can share is that this agreement does not address the nuts and bolts of Iran's nuclear program. That gets left to upcoming negotiations. I can also tell you that this agreement would theoretically end the fighting between the U.S. and Iran, and it would end the U.S. blockade in the Strait. But the text of this agreement has not yet been released, which is leading to the confusion over what else is in it.
The deal came together just hours before President Trump boarded Air Force One bound for the G7 summit. The agreement, the Iranians say, ends all military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, immediately and permanently. Trump posted that the Strait of Hormuz, the transitway for 20% of the world's oil, will open upon the signing of the deal on Friday. But an Iranian news agency with government ties claimed that Iran would actually have 30 days to demine and reopen the strait. Senator Lindsey Graham, a Trump ally, said he was somewhat concerned that Iran's view of the agreement seems different than what the American negotiating team is claiming. For instance, Iranian outlets reported the agreement allows for the immediate unfreezing of $13 billion in frozen Iranian assets. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth disputed that on Face the Nation.
It's performance-based. No money released to Iran until they perform.
The agreement provides 60 days for negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. Trump told the New York Times if those talks prove unsuccessful, he will restart military attacks on Tehran or make the U.S. the guardian of the Middle East in exchange for 20% of the region's revenues. Here in Europe, Trump will meet with the leaders of the UK, Germany, France, and Italy, whose economies have seen a slowdown due to the spike in oil prices. On the eve of the G7 summit, protesters took to the streets in Geneva. Demonstrators told us they're here to protest fascism, imperialism, and Trump himself.
He do a lot of things that's not good for the world.
U.S. and Iranian officials are expected to meet here in Switzerland on Friday for a signing ceremony. And over the next couple of days, the G7 leaders are going to be discussing ways that Europe can help get these commercial shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz reopened as quickly as possible, because that is going to be the key, Gayle, to getting oil prices back down.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. Let's bring in CBS News national security analyst Aaron McLean to bring us up to date. Aaron, it's always good to have you here, especially on this topic. Do you think it's accurate to call this a peace deal?
Well, peace deals, Gayle, would resolve the fundamental underlying issues between the two countries involved. This does not appear to do that based on what we know. We do know that it seems to punt on the nuclear issue. And I think the best way to understand what we're looking at here is actually a further 60-day extension of the ceasefire in which that issue is going to be worked out. All that appears to be agreed to up front is a mechanism by which the Strait of Hormuz will be reopened and the American blockade of Iranian ports will be ended. But even there's some really important details, like, for example, will Iran charge registration fees for use of the strait that we still don't know?
You mentioned it briefly, Aaron, but what are the exact steps that need to be taken to move this deal forward? Because the White House seems very confident.
Right. Well, there would need to be ultimately agreement on the nuclear program and whether or not Iran will take practical, meaningful steps to restrict its own capacity to produce nuclear weapons. That's the core issue. It would be nice if other underlying issues in the conflict, like Iran's missile program and its support for terror proxies, were also addressed. But that appears to be off the table. And I'll point out a structural issue that cuts against, to some extent, the administration's confidence, which is that the United States up front is surrendering the leverage of its blockade just to get the Iranians to reopen the strait, even before these other issues get negotiated.
That doesn't actually sound so positive. As we sit here today with any deal, everybody always wants to know who won, who lost. In your opinion, who has the upper hand as we sit here in this moment?
Well, again, with the structure of this deal surrendering a fair amount of American leverage up front, I think the Iranians have successfully leveraged their closure of the strait to set themselves up for some degree of success in these ongoing negotiations. President Trump is on the record as saying that the Iranians have never won a war and they've never lost a negotiation. It's too soon to say right now, but they're negotiating pretty hard.
All right, Aaron McLean, to be continued. Thank you for your time this morning.
Of course.